We might begin. So, welcome everyone, and very pleased to be here again today, sharing with you some very stimulating material today. It's going to be another one of Shantideva's driving the point home sessions. We've had a little bit of a respite, but I'm sure we're going to be able to do that in a delightful and meaningful way. So I'll hand over to Lou to kindly lead the prayers for us. Thank you, Lou.
Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge to the enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge into the enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aryavalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then to the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including, no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including, no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false, The mantra of perfection wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgati Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised, thus spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways, with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely bodies adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, thus completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligent wisdom so I may get insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O Holy Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakama wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Gurus.
Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. So we'll just spend a few quiet moments consolidating our motivation for the session ahead. So bringing our awareness inwards. Just for a few moments, gently observing the breath coming and going. Relaxing our body and mind as we do so. And now, from the very depths of our heart, we generate a strong feeling of altruism, powerful wish to benefit each and every sentient being without exception. And in order to do this, we need to soften, displace, even dismantle our self-cherishing attitude, a constant obsessive preoccupation with my needs, I. So putting this aside, see if we can make a strong aspiration to spend this time together, becoming familiar with the details of practice of a Bodhisattva's way of life by following the instructions of the precious Shantideva, whose extraordinary words speak to us directly across many centuries as though they're being spoken right now. So with that, we can begin the session. I'll just quickly recap. Last week, we finished on verses 43 and 44, which I'll requote. I should undertake whatever deed I have intended to do and think of doing nothing other than it. With my mind applied to the task, I should set about for the time being to accomplish it. And 44, by acting in this way, all is well done. But by acting otherwise, neither action will be done. Likewise, there will be no increase in the proximate disturbing conceptions that come from a lack of alertness. So, as mentioned last week, Geshe Sonam Senmo concisely presents the meaning of these verses. I quote, "Whatever is most important, that is what should be practiced. In this context, once something has been undertaken, it becomes more important." Sonam Senmo also indicated, I quote, "Having completed those tasks which were already begun, subsequently, one can accomplish other things." So what are we to take from this? It's actually incredibly sound advice. If you put the two together, we are being presented with a perfect schema for effective time management. I don't use that in a silly way at all, because it's also a description of a practical basis enabling us to accomplish our aims. And this is including, of course, the most important spiritual aims of stepping and traversing the path of the Bodhisattvas. It's often the case that we find our lives full of dangling broken ends of projects not completed. And we take on too much and we manage to mismanage the whole entire caboodle and end up with a gigantic mess accompanied by frustration. So the call here from Shantideva is to pinpoint, clarify precisely what it is we're wishing to accomplish, and then to take the first step towards that, and then the second, the third, and the fourth, and so forth, until it's successfully accomplished, rather than taking on new projects and new projects and new projects. So we're talking about sort of skill, time management here in a very, very practical way. But it also applies to our spiritual pursuits, because our ambition to generate bodhicitta in our own minds is our main task. And so we should be able to organize other things around pursuing that in a very, very coherent and resolved fashion. Not getting distracted, in other words, by worldly activities to the extent that we have to give up our pursuit, our aim there. So I recognize that we have many demands, family commitments, employment commitments, financial commitments. All of that's very, very true. So these are valid and necessary to successfully navigate So we're not asking us to toss all that to the wind at all, but just trying to keep a very, very pragmatic focus on how we actually pursue our spiritual practice. So I thought while thinking about today's class that it seems obvious advice, but sometimes in a so-called spiritual context, we become a little mystical and are inclined to think that if we have the right feelings, the right things will happen just by dint of the magic of our spirituality, if you like. But Shantideva is not saying that. He's saying, yes, but you must do the work and it must be in a coherent, cohesive, organized fashion. So don't lose sight of that practical side of things. So the next main topic is protecting the three doors from degeneration, and it has two subheadings: protecting the training of the body from degeneration, and secondly, protecting the training of the mind from degeneration. Protecting the body, the practice of the body from degeneration, has three subheadings: not letting the body fall under the control of distractions, abandoning meaningless activities, and analysing the motivation at the time of the action. So not letting the body fall under the control of the distractions is captured by verse 45, which reads, "If I happen to be present when a senseless conversation is taking place, or if I happen to see some kind of spectacular show, I should abandon attachment towards it." We probably have to look at this reference here to senseless conversation, because as Sonam Semmo indicates, it is to talk in a way or a manner that is itself pointless. It's unnecessary, and it's dedicated to the task of distraction. So we need to look here at what's actually happening with our talk and our engagement in talk. And Shantideva is not asking us not to talk and not to communicate, but to start becoming mindful of what is actually going down in those moments, particularly in social activities and events. So you might wish to protest and say, what's wrong with shooting the breeze by chatting away mindlessly or idly with some close friends? So we do this in a relaxed, unstructured kind of way. But Shantideva's purpose is not to somehow crush that geniality that we might have in our social intercourse at all. But he's, in a way, alerting us to the almost insidious manner in which so-called mindless chatter can give way to situations that are much more problematic, such as gossip, for example. So I just sort of formulated a little hallucinatory conversation which might illustrate the point. Did you hear what Susan said to Trisha? It was outrageous. Well, no. What did she say? I'm dying to know. Well, she said that her partner was embezzling money to pay for his gambling habit, which is like totally out of control. Oh, I'm not surprised by that, Claire. And it's funny you should mention it, because the creep borrowed money from me several months ago to pay a medical bill, he said, and the prick has never paid me back. Well, that's nothing to what I heard, Sonia. He has been sending money to a girlfriend. You remember Ashani? Well, you won't be surprised it's her, etc., 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 etc. So you can see here that what appears to be a mindless shooting of the breeze between two close friends is invoking all sorts of character judgments and dismissals in the guise of that idle chatter. So all of those little keys are acting as hooks potentially to draw up, suction up a delusion, an afflicted mind that's then going to dominate what happens next. So once they have been awakened, once they've been hooked, these delusions will seek to dominate the direction of the conversation. We almost become the sort of wake behind the giant ship of our delusion at that moment, because it carries us into waters that we weren't anticipating being in a moment before. So in such moments, we actually become excited, highly excitable, highly animated. Our eyes shine brightly. They twinkle. But only so because we have become a puppet dangling on the strings of the puppeteer, the delusions. We can actually be addicted to that kind of excitement. That's the point I'm making here. The delusions flourish in that kind of excited terrain. Consider from another angle, idle chatter can be a waste of time, of our precious human rebirth, which at any moment, even in the very next, might abruptly and rudely end. Geshe Topten, a contemporary Tibetan commentator, suggests that this verse also indicates that it might also not be good to spend time reading novels. This is a provocative statement, I think. I think, however, the basic thrust of Shantideva's purpose is intact. He is proposing ways in which we can guard our body from falling under the sway of various afflictions. But I also feel that it's necessary that we do this in an intelligent and discerning manner. For my own part, I treasure reading great novels, such as I mentioned a few that had a huge influence on me: Crime and Punishment, Madame Bovary, Lost Delusions, Anna Karenina, Pride and Prejudice, and Mansfield Park, etc., etc. They helped broaden and mature my outlook on the world and taught me socially and historically inflected mores, especially as I was a somewhat isolated child growing up in a regional outback town of Broken Hill, which, for those who know, was the site of the first Mad Max films, so sort of kind of an apocryphal desert landscape, or made into one by colonial imagination, if you like. So novels like Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha also dangled the prospect of the Buddha in front of me. It was very, very alluring, very, very influential. And I just mention these sort of examples to say that I'm not a Puritan. I don't believe that means we have to stop reading novels, stop reading newspapers, etc., and only read Dharma texts. But it's nonetheless a warning not to idle away our time in a kind of more or less meaningless way, and using literature as a device for accomplishing that. So likewise, with the caution by Shantideva to abandon attachments to some kind of spectacular show, you'll notice that Shantideva is not saying that one should abandon spectacular shows, meaning outright. We might think of concerts, wedding ceremonies, river regattas, festival parades, and so forth, even funerals, perhaps. Rather, we must abandon our attachment to them. So this is a radically different and infinitely more nuanced thing to do. Renunciation does not mean somehow extracting ourselves from the world, but training to live in the world without attachment, hatred, etc. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, renunciation does not mean relinquishing happiness. It is the aspiration for liberation, the determination to seek a higher and more enduring happiness than samsara can offer. End of quote. Therefore, it is a case of radically reorganized priorities. It doesn't mean that we're required to somehow extract ourselves from our lived environment in order to dwell in some kind of abstract realm from which all ordinary worldly things and beings have been sucked out, some sort of vacuum, if you like. The fact that the Buddha is shown cradling a begging bowl, often, is a case in point. Even the Buddha had to eat, and to allow others to offer him alms was a uniquely powerful means of their accumulating merit. Therefore, the Buddha's bowl can be understood as a sign that he was able to bridge the samsaric and non-samsaric realms in a way precisely fitting for us. He was with us and not with us at the same time, because he wasn't participating in samsaric activities for their own sake. If the Buddha had manifested otherwise, then we would have had no concourse, no access to a living Buddha, nor would we have had any bridge to have a two-way communication or conversation. So further regarding a reasonable view of renunciation, what it actually means, Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, and I quote, in our present day-to-day life, subduing the mind is dependent on practicing renunciation, controlling the dissatisfied mind. Attachment, anger, ignorance, and so forth. Cutting off these things, diminishing these disturbing thoughts. We control anger by practicing patience, by practicing compassion, by practicing loving kindness, cherishing others, and that way we control the self-cherishing thought and so forth. End of quote. So clearly then, renunciation involves controlling the dissatisfied mind, our dissatisfied mind, not controlling our outer environment or even seeking to do so. It is therefore different from what the Tibetans with somewhat droll humour often refer to as hairy renunciation, referring to that outwardly visible but nonetheless fastidious neglect of one's personal appearance as a palpable sign, presumably, that one has indeed given up on the vanities of worldly existence. This was a sort of term that was thrown around a bit in the early days of the Tibetans meeting the Westerners, many of whom would instantly stop cutting their hair, stop washing, start wearing rags, and living on mountaintops as a sign that they had already become serious spiritual practitioners. From a Tibetan point of view, struggling with the incredibly real implications of having become a diaspora or a community with no means of income and so forth, they couldn't imagine what was going on here. It just seemed folly indeed. So because we are bodhisattvas in training, though we might not have yet placed even a small toe on an actual path, means we must be aware of our susceptibilities, our vulnerabilities. Referring to the gist of Shantideva's verse, if we allow ourselves to dwell or inhabit spaces, particularly social spaces, which incline our mind towards dissatisfaction, namely deluded thoughts, the generation of deluded thoughts, then it is wisest to step carefully away. We've already mentioned Shantideva's reference to spectacular shows or impressive entertainments, as other translations put it. So it's, again, not that we can't attend that extravagant or major social event, our nephew or niece's 21st birthday party, or so forth. Rather, it's a matter of discretion and finely modulated restraint. I mention here Lama Yeshe's attendance of disco parties. But this doesn't mean that when Lama Yeshe went to a disco party with strobe lights and pounding beats, he was in some way succumbing or immersed in that event. He was exploring, as he said, the way in which his students, his new Western students, were choosing to spend their time. And he did that with great warmth and great sort of conviviality. He wasn't in any way judging or harsh about his students sort of having a fun time in that way. So it's possible from a Bodhisattva's perspective to be involved in the way of the world without actually being drawn into it in terms of delusion. And this is indicated very beautifully by Shantideva's quotation from the Sutra on the Exhortation to Higher Intention. I'm going to quote this passage. Then the Bodhisattva Maitreya said to the Blessed One, those unwise bodhisattvas who will leave behind the highest teachings and take up lowly tasks will certainly be totally lacking in wisdom. The Blessed One replied to the Bodhisattva, great being Maitreya, as follows. Thus it is, Maitreya, it is just as you say. Those bodhisattvas who will leave behind the highest teachings and take up lowly tasks will be totally lacking in wisdom. But also, I declare to you, and you should fully understand, that those bodhisattvas who have no spiritual practice, no meditative stability, no renunciation, no daily recitation, and no effort to acquire great learning are not genuinely ordained in the religion of the Tathagata. Maitreya, the religion of the Tathagata is defined by meditation and renunciation, conditioned by pristine awareness, and defined by working hard at meditation practice and becoming absorbed in pristine awareness. It is not defined, and this is the overlap very clearly with Shantideva here, it is not defined by work or by actions of lay people. These are the actions of those who try hard to do things that don't make sense and who delight in cyclic existence, namely work and getting tangled up in worldly activities. A bodhisattva should not aspire to be like them. End of quote. So if we do choose to read novels or circulate in casual social spaces or attend rave parties, we should do so without getting entangled, embroiled in them. Rather, we should remain immaculately composed in our blissful awareness of the final mode of reality of things. Of course, this is perhaps something that we cannot yet do, but determining this is surely part of the operation or the task of deciding how and when will one engage in whatever activity, while skillfully avoiding those situations in which we will stand a real chance of giving way to the delusions. As Geshe Jumpa Gatso succinctly puts it, I quote, senseless conversation means listening to various conversations about royalty, robbers, and so on. Also watching trivial shows with singing and dancing and so forth out of distraction, We should not, just for the distraction of it, listen to conversation, watch shows, and so forth, when there is not much purpose. If there is a purpose, such as guarding the minds of others, we should be careful not allowing our mind to go under the power of the delusions. So I've developed this point at some length because it is, I think, a common pitfall for very dedicated, aspiring Western Dharma students, because there's a tendency to try to carve off and away a certain life that will somehow stand apart from the way of the world. This is not what's been said at all. And it's very, very interesting that there can be a great purpose in attending these things, building bonds with other people and so forth, in order that we'll be in a better position to support and help them in whatever way we possibly can going forward. We need contact, in other words, to be able to do that. So the next subheading is abandoning meaningless activities. And we've now arrived at this second subheading of the division called protecting the training of the mind, the training of the body from degeneration. And the verse pertinent is now 46. If for no reason I start digging the earth, picking at the grass, or drawing patterns on the ground, then by recalling the advice of the Buddhas, I should immediately stop out of fear. So the reference again is to meaningless idleness, the pointless ditherings that constitute an absorbed state of distraction. It's fascinating how absorbed a state of distraction can be, isn't it? Perhaps we might add that it's the exterior equivalent of combing our hair endlessly with our fingers or doodling on a piece of paper with no design or outcome in mind. The reason for fear, as mentioned by Shantideva in his verse, is that, yes, the clock is ticking and this life will soon end. Because we have indulged in dull and unwitting activities, it might also be possible, looking at this from a karmic point of view, that we've created the causes for or supported the causes for an unfortunate rebirth. So I just mentioned this in passing, and sometimes the example of an animal rebirth is given in this case. Pema Chodron points out that the Tibetan word for meaningless distraction is dunzi. She notes, we can waste a whole life with dunzi. This is Shantideva's point here. Geshe Jumpa Gatso indicates that recalling the advice of the Buddha has particular significance for those who have taken pratamoksha vows, for whom the various precepts and prohibitions are very precisely and elaborately laid out. He says, if a bhikshu has performed remembering the occasion in the morning, thereby seeking the Buddha's permission, he is allowed to dig the earth or cut the grass if there is a special Dharma purpose. Otherwise, there is no permission to do so when there is no particular purpose. In this kind of activity, we run enormous risks of harming the lives of other sentient beings. Therefore, if we find ourselves on the point of such actions, we should recognize it as a fault and give it up. End of quote. So the mention of a special Dharma purpose is a key to take on board here. For example, it was necessary for the Tibetan monks in exile to clear the jungle themselves in southern India and prepare the land for food cultivation and for dwellings following the Chinese invasion and occupation which occurred in 1951. The Tibetans in exile couldn't have established the great monasteries in exile otherwise. There was so much at stake. Of course, we are also invariably faced with the same issue of harming the lives of other sentient beings if we dig or plough or cut the grass. For this reason, we must likewise consider or seriously consider whether or not we are seeking to minimize harm in our gardening or agricultural pursuit. So it's recognized here that one has to eat, one has to grow food. But if one does so, then to do that in a very, very conscientious and compassionate way, seeking to minimize harm and also to rescue as many lives as we possibly can. The third subheading, analysing the motivation at the time of the action, refers to verse 47. Whenever I have a desire to move my body or to say something, first of all, I should examine my mind and then, with steadiness, act in the proper way. The meaning here, I think, is very obvious, especially as this verse is an effective summation of previous verses concerning maintaining suitable bodily composure and behaviour. But in practice, I think we'll agree it's much, much more challenging. Even the old adage, think before you speak, is easier said than done. Consider our tendency, my tendency, to act or speak precipitously, or to suddenly lurch towards someone with our body, or dynamically fall away from someone when they have said something to offend or dismay us. So our body is involved. How much control in those moments do we actually have? How much do we effectively maintain? Pema Chodron very cunningly and wisely conjures our contemporary scenario of compulsive, addictive texting. We are constantly checking our phones and firing away often ill-thought messages this way and that way, and signaling any number of likes and dislikes without even for a moment considering their potential consequences. Likewise, with our planned meditation session, 2 minutes into it, we hear our mobile phone ping and our mind is instantly out the window or out the door. Pema Chodron says, you've decided to meditate for 45 minutes and you're 13 minutes into your sitting. Suddenly you remember something important you must do. Dunzi has entered the picture. If you fail to acknowledge that tug as just a tug of your thought, as just thinking, you will find yourself watering the plants or checking your email. Instead, the initial urge to walk about or phone someone can simply be acknowledged. Without praise or blame, you can touch these thoughts, let them go, and come back to taming the mind. So I think that's, very, very eloquently put, very dynamic personal advice. How true it is. So Shantideva now shifts gears. He wishes to extensively explain how at the time of performing the action, we are to check the motivation. So verse 47, just briefly discussed, presented the summary or the brief version of this point, but Shantideva is now going to unfold it in some considerable detail. This extensive explanation, which further investigates how we're to examine the motivation at the time of the action, is itself composed of 5 subheadings. These are very important as they comprehensively carry us through a number of specific worldly situations, ones that we're all the time meeting. So I'll enumerate them in full. What to do when one wishes to generate afflictions. Secondly, what to do at the time of mental excitement. What to do at the time of praise and so forth. What to do when one thinks. What about the welfare of others? Thinking about the welfare of others. And what to do when one wishes to generate anger or sadness. So the first one, explaining 48. Whenever there is attachment in my mind, and whenever there is the desire to be angry, I should not do anything nor say anything, but remain like a piece of wood. We've encountered this wood analogy earlier in verse 34, you'll recall, which said, when, just as I'm about to act, I can see my mind is tainted with defilement, at such a time I should remain unmovable like a piece of wood. There it works as a means of capturing a particularly powerful form of immovable determination or resolve not to be swayed by the emerging or pending force of an emotional affliction. As Kunsang Pelden said, quote, our minds should be unshakable and we should not allow them to fall under the influence of the negative thoughts. Involved as such thoughts are with the objects of the senses, as soon as bad thoughts arise, we must beat them down without delay. End of quote. Here, the analogy works a little bit differently to capture the meaning of another essential method for not falling into the pathway prescribed or impelled by a delusion that is about to taint our minds. That is, as soon as we recognize that mind is arising, we simply shut shop. We shut down as though throwing a light switch off. We make no effort whatsoever to formulate a thought or an action of any kind. It's a fascinating proposal, isn't it? The reason for that is, you might ask, is because we're incapable under those pending circumstances of an affliction of easily doing that, generating a way out, if you like, a skillful way out. Given that we can't, we don't have the apparatus or the wherewithal to do so, what we can do is shut the operation down with a jolt. Just stop outright. Sever the momentum of the rising delusion in its very tracks. So Geshe Gyaltsabje's commentary makes this very clear. He says, when the mind wishes, that word wishes is interesting here, when the mind wishes to get attached or wishes to become angry, do not engage in any physical action and do not speak. Rather, abide like a tree and be able to hold the antidote. So in this case, holding ourselves like a tree is the antidote. Beautiful tree. Thank you very much. What a magnificent tree. Thank you. Has that been your meditation object in the last week? It looks like an oak. Is it a beautiful oak tree? I can't hear, but anyway, thank you. So go on strike. Don't engage in anything, but remain firm and stable in that not engaging in anything. The reason Geshe-Doga suggests for desisting in activity in this fashion is as follows. The consequence of acting either physically or verbally in moments of intense anger is clearly undesirable, and we can all easily relate to that. It may be a little bit harder for you to accept and understand that physical actions and verbal speech in moments of intense attachment are also inappropriate. Nevertheless, the fact remains that when one acts out of strong attachment, those actions also become tainted and faulty. So this is what we have to keep in mind. Put simply, if we mentally seize up, the energy or steam is also sucked out of our physical or verbal actions that otherwise might have been able to be carried out by the rising delusion. The next subheading is what to do at the time of mental excitement. And this is referring to verses 49 and 50. So I'll read them both and then I'll comment on them one at a time. 49, whenever I have distracted thoughts, the wish to verbally belittle others, feelings of self-importance or self-satisfaction, when I have the intention to describe the faults of others, pretension, and the thoughts to deceive others. 50, whenever I'm eager for praise or have the desire to blame others, whenever I have the wish to speak harshly and cause dispute, at all such times I should remain like a piece of wood. So the reference to that whenever I have distracted thoughts in the opening line of 49 must be understood. It's referring to those moments when my attitude is becoming irritated. Word irritation here is really, really interesting. Who does not know this feeling of a building irritation? One was a real practitioner, one wouldn't know it, but if one isn't, one knows what it feels like to find oneself becoming irritated. It's as though it feeds on itself, doesn't it? We become irritated, we become more tense, we become more irritated, we become more tense. The outer situation is almost irrelevant at this point because the irritation is taking over command of the situation. Our mind is spinning away from any prospect of feeling at peace. So such irritation, of course, can very, very rapidly escalate into rage and other very destructive emotions as well. A whole host of secondary afflictions spring from this point of irritation. Verbally belittling others, which is also mentioned in the first line, refers to derisive or disparaging speech. Certainly, many forms of sarcasm or sardony are to be included here. And we can understand that such speech can be as cutting as a knife. It may even lead someone to commit suicide. Such is the case with cyberbullying and photographic doxing using AI and fake identities. I just mention these contemporary examples because this is where these activities are now taking place. And it's almost not only taking place there, but they're becoming very, very prevalent. And it's almost as though because one's actual body and mind aren't present at the scene of the doxing or the harsh words, one can act with impunity in a way that one wouldn't if one's own friend was sitting beside us watching what was or hearing what we were saying. There's no witness. And so we get away with murder. We think we can get away with murder. So these are the new unrestrained frontiers for many of the delusions to operate in. So I use that as an illustration, not to point the finger at the perils of new technologies. We all use them, we're using them now. They can be very beneficial. Self-importance in the second line refers to pride, something for which politicians are often famous for. Many of its features can be gathered under the rubric narcissism, which can be found pushed to even pathological extents, as we know. Hence the role of hubris in Greek drama, something that has brought many a hero undone from the inside out, as it were. So in Greek mythology, someone's pride creates a kind of crevasse in their ability to protect themselves as a blind spot, and through that crevasse, their appalling destiny is manifested. They are killed or overthrown or destroyed. So it's interesting, isn't it? That self-importance carries this incredible inherent danger with it. Self-satisfaction can also be seen as a form of smugness, a variety of vanity, because it presumes most arrogantly that we are somehow so flawless as to be untouchable, unimpeachable, as it were. Pretension is also a variety of vanity, one whereby we assume qualities we in fact don't have, with express purpose, even if it's unconsciously held, of impressing others and thus gaining advantage over them in some way. It is therefore a form of camouflage, a species of deceit. Speaking harshly is referring to abusive language, which, as we know, can also be exceedingly cruel. Again, it is a matter of power politics, seeking to forcefully bully our way towards an upper hand. Causing disputes, you see Shantideva is giving us an entire litany here. Causing disputes is picking fights. These can be physical, as we especially see in those cases where individuals or groups utilize weapons. Again, the pretext can be ludicrously small, but its outcome can be monstrously large, as we see in the case of world wars. Guilt subject catalogues these faults that I've been quickly enumerating as follows. When there is mental excitement with an object, when mocking others in jest, when full of pride due to qualities, when being conceited due to youth or other reasons, when thinking about criticizing others, when one is cunning and wants profit out of discontentment, when one thinks about deceiving others with pretension and dishonesty, when one praises oneself wholeheartedly by expressing one's qualities and puts others down by mentioning their faults, when scolding others and being argumentative and quarrelling. And he then concludes, the subject concludes, at these times, one should remain unshakable like a tree, being self-supporting with the antidote. I quoted that before. It's running as a refrain through these verses. So Geshe Doga concludes his commentary on this point. With respect to these times, it is said that whenever one finds oneself engaging in one of these 8 activities, referring to the list given by Guilt Subject, then in order to counteract them, one should remain firm and stable like a tree. Then one will be not influenced by these negative tendencies, and one will be able to remain steadfast. So self-supporting here appears to be a further play, I think, on the tree analogy, but with the additional resonance that one must be self-reliant in applying the antidote as necessary. We're self-supporting because we're supplying the antidote from within us to deal with the situation. And in that way, we're like the trunk of that tree. We're not having to lean on something else. We're able to draw up the strength from within. This is a beautiful sort of aspect, I think, of the analogy. And again, the advice to remain just like logs of wood, as Kunsang Pelden puts it, is to refrain from every act of body, speech, and mind. I quoted that before. So much more could be extracted from these two verses, which perhaps painfully encapsulate our afflictive penchants in the form of an all too familiar catalogue or litany of behavioural errors. It's quite grueling, isn't it, to consider these points. So much more could be extracted from them, but one could spend considerable time meditating on just one of these faults, and that's to be recommended, of course. For example, our tendency to be derisive when we judge another as somehow not worthy of our respect. Just what is entailed in such scenarios that would appear instantly brewed, as it were? Do we even notice the manner in which a derisive tone can slip or creep into our voice? A tone that has the capacity to cause flowers to wilt and collapse, let alone people. So it's fascinating. This is what Shantideva was talking about, the subtlety of these points. That when we're trying, we wish to hurt someone through speech in a derisive manner, derisiveness works as a particular inflection built into the quality of our voice as we produce it. So it's already weaponized, irrespective of the content of the words. The very tone is withering. So take responsibility for the tone of our voice in this subtle way, careful way. Or consider how we hang out for praise, even astonishingly when it's not at all deserved. This can be a temptation for Dharma teachers and Dharma students alike. Oh, that class was so good. Surely I'll get a lot of likes on Facebook. Let's check up and see. Oh, so many. Now I'll surely be famous. Or so few. I'm a Dharma disaster. Indeed, again, the technology of social media would seem to algorithmically thrive on such earnest cravings. It certainly has the capacity to exploit them. So I'm just mentioning this because there is research coming out that the algorithmic patterns of social media are themselves coarsening people's behavior because it's driving them to increasingly extreme positions. You might also argue that it can refine them in beautiful ways. Maybe that's also true. But in terms of our afflictions, they can be supported through material that gets fed to us through the algorithms. So when we show outrage at an article, the software will spit out an even more outrageous story, and we show even more outrage, and then it spits out a more extreme story. So we have cases in Australia at the moment of very young boys, 13, 14, and 15, involved in knife attacks aligned with extreme right-wing political ideologies that are clustered on private chat groups on the web. So the police are now being forced to look into how these groups on the web are working to train young boys into what are being described as terrorists' acts. So I just mentioned this. These are really high stakes for our culture. So you get my drift. The stakes can be inordinately high. And there's certainly nothing not absolutely contemporary in Shantideva's concerns in this catalogue of afflictions. So the next subheading is what to do at the time of praise and so forth. And this is referring to verse 51. When I seek when I desire material gain, honour or fame, whenever I seek attendance or a circle of friends, and when in my mind I wish to be served, at these times I should remain like a piece of wood. Again, the advice is to remain like a piece of wood in regards to the faulty tendencies. I'm now going to go into a little bit more enumerative detail. Kumsang Pelden indicates that over the course of verses 48 to 53 of Shantideva's 5th chapter, he catalogues 27 faults that we need to be wary of. So it's timely, isn't it, to list them. That's why I said at the beginning of the session it's somewhat grueling, because most of these faults are probably almost daily activities. So, verse 48, I'm just going to enumerate them according to their verses if you want to go back and do the research. Verse 48, delight and attachment for what we like, our friends and possessions, and aversion and repugnance towards enemies and other unpleasant objects from which our minds draw back. Verse 49, frantic behaviour of thought, word and deed, where we do not realise what we are doing, especially when our mind is in the grip of attachment, giving rise to uncontrollable and compulsive behaviour. Fourthly, we may have the will to make fun of others or to play tricks on them. We may be arrogant, fifthly, with 7 kinds of pride. So I'll quickly list them. The pride of ego clinging, simple pride of thinking we are special, the pride of thinking that we are better or greater than others, the pride of pride, meaning one thinks one is the best of an already accomplished group, and a pride of thinking that we're only slightly inferior to someone else who is obviously exceptional. It's fascinating, isn't it? The kind of varieties that are ingenious in modes of pride to sort of sneak into all sorts of situations. Perverted pride, sixthly, when we're proud of doing something reprehensible, and blatant arrogance, deluded self-confidence. So returning now to the larger list, of infatuation with ourselves, self-satisfied because of our physical appearance, our youth, our learning, or our wealth. The urge to expose the hidden faults of others, either directly or indirectly. The repeated urge to irritate people, which is explained as wishing to revive old conflicts that may have been reconciled in the past, or never been content with the alms donated, always wanting and asking for more. And we may have the wish to deceive and cheat others. Verse 50, 10. We feel the desire to speak highly of our own good qualities or those of the group to which we belong. 11, when we want to criticise and put down those we don't like. 12, when we find ourselves using insults, wounding others with our words. 13, when we're picking a quarrel with others and ourselves by creating divisions. And verse 51, which we're currently up to, 14, when we find we have a desire for things, food, for instance, or clothes. 15, we feel the wish to be looked up to be given a good seat, or to be respected by others. 16, we would like others to know how good we are. 17, we would like to be surrounded by efficient people who would serve us and wait upon us, fetching water, attending to our fire, and so on. And 18, when we wish to be served immediately, to have our beds prepared and to be tucked into our blankets. So verse 52 reads, whenever I have the desire to decrease or stop working for others, and the desire to pursue my welfare alone, if motivated by such thoughts, a wish to say something occurs. At these times, I should remain like a piece of wood. So to continue Kunsang Peldon's enumeration, 19, we feel like neglecting even some small action that would be of benefit to others, which we are nevertheless perfectly able to do, such as helping others when they are sick. 20, we want to get the best for ourselves, even something trivial, like a good place in the temple. 21, since the mouth, which is full, its mouth with its talk full of attachment or anger and all its futile and meaningless chatter, is a treasury of non-virtue, the very gateway of faults and downfalls. When we have an urge to speak, we should instead stay like a log of wood. Then verse 53, whenever I have impatience, laziness, cowardice, shamelessness, or the desire to talk nonsense, if thoughts of partiality arise, at these times I should remain like a piece of wood. And so this verse completes the enumeration. 22, when we are full of intolerance, which is the antithesis of patience. 23, when we're struck in laziness, which is the reverse of diligence. And 24, when we feel faint-hearted and put off, when we hear about the teachings on emptiness and practices that are difficult to do. Or 25, when we're boastful, that is arrogantly pretentious. 26, when given to various kinds of light and ill-considered chatter without care or reflection. And finally, 27, we have attachment to our group, institutions, traditions, etc., thinking they are the best in both a worldly and a religious sense. So Kunsang Peldon adds to this last point, to put on a show of devotion to the lamas of one's own tradition is mostly a species of attachment. Notice here it says to put on a show of devotion. He's not talking about showing devotion. He's talking about putting on a show of devotion to one's own lamas is mostly a species of attachment. It has consequently been said that there should be no confusion between genuine devotion and sectarian bias. So we must make that distinction very clearly. And I think worth mentioning here that being full of intolerance, which is the first line of verse 52, refers to being impatient, which I've mentioned, but impatient due to belligerence and despondency when they occur. So belligerence is a secondary mental factor, which is sometimes translated as a proximate mental factor, which is an intensified form of anger, which is one of the 6 root delusions or unwholesome factors. Geshe Doga explains, the object of belligerence, as presented previously, is an animate object, not inanimate objects, whereas anger can be focused on any object. There are 3 types of objects of anger: suffering, sentient beings, and inanimate objects. You can generate anger towards all three, whereas belligerence is targeted only towards sentient beings. So regarding the mention of laziness, straight after the mention of impatience is significant because it represents a fault residing at the other end of the spectrum of mental intensity or stress, as it were. So at one end, if one's mind is feeling very heightened, then it's more likely that belligerence will arise. And at other times, when the mind is feeling very lazy, then we'll have an inclination towards despondency. So these are interesting things to consider. Of course, we're in a way measuring the intensity of the feeling in order to gain a grip on how to manage the situation. So usually, of course, we find ourselves oscillating between these two extremes, don't we? So in the context of the above verse, fear, which is translated as cowardice by Batchelor, is explained by Gyaltsabje as referring to, quote, when being afraid of practicing virtue and so forth, due to laziness that is not joyful about virtue. So you can see here that laziness has crept back into the situation in relation to fear as well. The Venerable Michael Yeshi, in his translation of Geshe Doge's commentary on this verse, referred instead of shame, I'm moving on now to shamelessness. Shamelessness in the second line is another of the secondary mental afflictions, and we can find it variously translated, and it's translated as insolence as in the Padmakara version. However, the Venerable Michael Yeshi translates it as stubbornness, which also makes sense in as much as stubbornness prevents us from fully generating appropriate shame. Gyaltsabje makes it clear that this insolence, this refusal to admit fault, this stubbornness to conceding or accepting guilt is itself tied to situations in which we find ourselves mentally unconstrained or even incoherent. Geshe Doge elaborates. The term chetol, which is stubbornness, has the connotation of someone who is not really able to think things out clearly and just does things randomly. It is used to refer to someone who doesn't really have many values and who does anything they want. Even in the everyday world, such a person would not be considered reliable or trustworthy because they can just do whatever they want. Incoherence refers to the lack of a relationship between what was said earlier and what was said later. Incoherent, they don't add up. So if, end of quote, if we're honest with ourselves, I'm certain we can find cases in which we are incoherent in this way and thus are capable of making a proper muddle or mess of situations. Likewise, we might exhibit contrary behaviour, saying one thing or thinking one thing adamantly one moment and then saying its opposite several moments later. Shantideva's warning about partisanship, also in the verse, is always timely. We can slide into it so easily, often by dint of an overwhelming ambition to be a correct or best student or practitioner. This is why it is entangled often with pride and the currying of favour from our peers. A modern version of this might be called virtue signalling, whereby we seek by various gestures and personal revealing anecdotes to display not just our supremacy, but our immaculately pure and sort of virtuous practice of our tradition or our lineage, whatever. So the added danger of such biased views is that it can lead us to abandon respect for other traditions and schools of thought. Even within Buddhism, considered more generally, and such constitutes a significant downfall and can constitute a breakage of our Bodhisattva root vows. I just mentioned this in passing. I mean, it's a big passing because it's a major topic. In his 6-session yoga commentary, Geshe-Doga elaborated, Dharma is a very general term. Basically, it has two aspects. The inner Dharma, referring to what exists in the mind of the spiritual practitioner, and the outer Dharma, referring to the scriptural teaching. The outer Dharma pertains to both Mahayana and Hinayana vehicles, the latter of which includes another two, the hearer vehicle and the solitary realizer vehicle. In the context of this vow of not being partisan and dismissing the traditions of others, if you make an objection that the Dharma does not belong to the teaching of the Buddha, one would be falling into this trap. An example would be objecting to the scriptures of the hearer's vehicle that holds the Four Noble Truths as its core teaching. Geshe-Doga continues, in a similar way, we might object to a scripture of the solitary realizer vehicle, such as the 12 links of interdependent origination, which mainly deals with how a being is trapped within cyclic existence and how they might be freed. If we say that such an account is not the Buddha's teaching, it incurs a root downfall of our Bodhisattva vows. The import here is that even as a Bodhisattva, it is proper to respect the teachings of the lower vehicle. If, on the other hand, we disparage these teachings, consider them inferior or not sourced from the Buddha, we are abandoning the Dharma. This is why the Bodhisattva maintains such a strong resolve not to disparage or belittle any teachings, even those of the lower vehicle. Geshe-Doga continues, the Mahayana Dharma is given up if one criticizes or deliberately does not accept what is said in the Mahayana scriptures, which mainly deal with the two, the profound and the extensive. The meaning of these terms is explained clearly. Likewise, the vow is broken if we consider the Mahayana not to be the authentic, earlier teaching of the Buddha himself. This is a reference to some who say that the Mahayana teachings aren't anchored in the Buddha's words, but were somehow a later human invention. So, discriminate, and Geshe Nalandagi, by the way, adds another point here discussing this same issue. And he says that disparaging the Tantras is also a fault of this nature. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama frequently stresses that sectarianism is a dangerous pursuit. And it's dangerous because it holds one tradition as superior over another or as somehow more authentic. So I referred to these points at some length because as Buddhism becomes more anchored in the context of European or non-traditionally Buddhist cultures, there can be a tendency towards a kind of ideological tribalism, if you like. And this tribalism occurs in the very midst of our keen ambition to be practicing the Buddha's teachings in their very purest form. We hold that we're practicing the purest form, and that's where our intensity comes from. So this kind of thinking can become unhinged, and even virulently so. I'm thinking here of a really extreme case, which was the Japanese Shinriko cult, which was a heady mix, as we know, of classical Hindu and Buddhist ideas, and then later on grafted on certain aspects of Christian apocalyptic thought. And the followers of the guru, Asahara, were so uncritically devoted to him that they eventually cooperated in plans to manufacture in secret laboratories and then release the highly toxic sarin nerve gas in the Tokyo subway, all in the name of a fervent faith and belief in their leader, who had promised them that only his followers would be saved from the coming annihilation of civilization as we know it. Thus, the sectarianism in this example took on a global dimension. The privileged world of dedicated followers would be saved, and the entire rest of humanity who were clearly doomed. In the face of such a rigid and a bizarre bifurcation, all ordinary moral values were held to have become obsolete. Thus, the followers, because of their spiritual inspiration, were encouraged that they could do absolutely anything with impunity. And this appeared to be the case until the Japanese legal system caught up with them, condemning a number of the followers to death. This included Ashara himself. So to cut a long story short, if even for a moment we discover feelings of sectarianism to be arising, we should, as Shantideva advises, at these times remain like a lump of wood. So I'll move now to verse 54, which performs as a summary, as I mentioned before. Having in this way examined his mind for disturbing conceptions and for thoughts that strive for meaningless things, the courageous Bodhisattva should hold his mind steady through the application of remedial forces. So Konsang Pelden suggests this means we must get a grip on our minds and not allow ourselves, either in words or deeds, to indulge in bad thoughts. And Gyaltsabje says, thus having investigated the mind that strives in the afflictions and the meaningless, we shouldn't allow this mind to engage in negative actions with the antidote that is like a powerful hero, but keep it steady. So here the antidote is likened to a very powerful person who is not overcome by foes and so forth. So the advice here is abundantly clear. But having said all this, I think we have to acknowledge that the project that Shantideva is laying out for us here is perhaps somewhat daunting. Is anyone finding it daunting? It's thoroughly, exhaustively, elaboratively, pungently daunting, I think. And it may lead us to feel overwhelmed or even hopeless. But I feel, I'm just sort of speaking here from my own side, that as beginner practitioners, we must be realistic about the challenges we face, as there's a certain delight in the fact that perhaps for the first time in hundreds of lifetimes, we face the prospect of overcoming these problems, even beginning to hack away at them little bit by little bit, on the basis of having acknowledged our precious human rebirth. This is really something that we should not lose sight of for a moment. Because we have this precious human rebirth and we can instrumentalize it towards overcoming non-virtue and producing virtue, it is definitely possible that we'll be able to turn things around in a radical and precise manner. Therefore, as Geshe Doga and Shantideva has suggested, our application of antidotes must be considered like powerful heroes because they have the potential, the capacity to overcome the afflictions, face them head on. So this is a call, I think, to tie our courage to our loins and to take each step forward in what might be a bumpy and sometimes dangerous terrain with a hero's dauntless courage, a dauntless faith in our ability to actually conquer the afflictions and their corresponding negative pathways of action. If we truly take refuge and truly understand that the afflictions are adventitious and that our mind is primordially pure by nature, we certainly can legitimately recognize that we do have a stable and enduring base upon which to do so. So I'm going to quote now from Shantideva's training compendium, a very moving and beautiful passage from the noble Vajra Flag Sutra, which is describing, evoking the Bodhisattva's courage, which we're seeking to begin to generate as ourselves. They have the hands of joy in giving. They have the feet of great stability. They are committed to the Bodhisattva's way of life. Through the power of generosity and kindness, they are not overpowered by sensations. They vow to arouse the stainless mind, referring to bodhicitta. They know that pristine awareness is unfettered and that the Dharma body is never broken, cut, or injured. Since their mind have been made stable by spiritual teachers, they cannot be moved by all the demons. Their intentions are exalted. They remain in a single practice, and through generosity alone, they are certain to be free someday. End quote. So the mention of the perfection of giving is initially presented here because it's the first of the perfections to be perfected, and it's one in which we can throw ourselves into definitely right away. So the same sutra also says they do not turn their back and do not break. They do not turn back and do not break the continuity of practice. So this is how we're to consolidate our heroic resolve. We shall continue to take step after step along the Bodhisattva's paths and stages in a fearless fashion. Not once are we to take our eyes off the fundamental goal. As the same sutra inspiringly says, Bodhisattvas give themselves to all sentient beings. They pay attention to their wholesome actions, and through all those wholesome actions, they benefit all sentient beings. Like a lamp, they lead all sentient beings. Like happiness, they give energy to all sentient beings. Like the womb of everything, They carry all that lives. These are remarkable images, aren't they? Like the womb of everything, they carry all that lives. Like light, they accompany all sentient beings. They see themselves as like a chair for all that lives. They accompany the whole world as a continuing condition of wholesome actions. They join together with all sentient beings like a friend. Like a path, they show all sentient beings the way to the highest happiness. They prepare for all sentient beings the equipment for reaching the highest happiness. Like the sun, they treat all living beings as equals. Though they have the teachings, they ask for teachings on behalf of all sentient beings. They see themselves as obedient under the control of the needs of the whole world. They see all living beings as holy shrines and will themselves become the highest holy shrines for the entire world. They help the whole world to achieve mental balance. They see themselves as forwards, providing all kinds of assistance. They regard themselves as giving happiness to the whole world. They are committed to being generous donors of all that lives. They make themselves the knowledge to the entire world. They become dedicated to the Bodhisattva's way of life. So this is why we must, in the same way as these marvelous Bodhisattvas, determine to act with firm courage. And as stated in the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, now I should abandon neither the qualities of the Buddhas nor the great compassion that takes all sentient beings as its objects. So this is the crux. Now I should abandon neither the qualities of the Buddhas nor the great compassion that takes all sentient beings as its object. So this determination should stand unshakably even when we're facing threats to our lives. Even in such circumstances, we should not give rise to malice, but aspire instead to make sentient beings happy by setting them free and helping them to awaken fully to genuine full awakening, which is also a quote from the sutra, that last section. So it is also the case that when we realize emptiness with a valid cognizer, that the power of the afflictions will naturally dwindle and fall away. And thus, what we might call our ordinary compulsive afflictive psychology will also give way to a powerful mind that is ever ready to work to set sentient beings free. What could be more wondrous than that? So I might finish the presentation there. I couldn't end up on that litany of errors because it was excoriating. And I noticed I remember when I was a boy, I read Marcia Eliade, who was a very famous anthropologist of shamanism. This was pre the sort of contemporary shamanistic movements, actually. And he looked at tribal shamanism, and he noticed that in most shamanistic traditions, there is an excoriation actually carried out as a ritual robbing or denuding of the body of all flesh to reduce the person back to their bones, because only on that basis could they reinvent themselves radically, reappear as a better person or another form, more able to be of benefit to others. And so I'm taking that image of the skeletal the skeleton being revealed through this scarification process of identifying the delusions as a necessary process for this radical rejuvenation to occur. So yes, it is painful and will be painful, but we do it skillfully and in steps with this great aspiration carrying us along the way. And in that way, we will definitely come to no harm. So let's throw it open now to questions, quandaries, and thoughts, because I've tossed out a lot of dense information today, and I'm sorry for that, but it was just sort of unavoidable, given that the content, the way in which Shantideva would squeeze so much into each of these verses. Stephen.
I guess I'll go ahead with a thought or maybe an observation, and that it is quite a confronting, excoriating list of faults that I know I can put a check mark beside each and every one of them, multiple check marks maybe.
What color pen?
Yeah. And what's interesting is, though, that Shantideva gives us a very simple solution.
Mm.
And it's got a couple of different variants to it, as you kindly pointed out this evening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting, just from, the Buddhist model of the mind, minds and mental factors. When we have a certain mind, its precursor is the immediately preceding mind, the immediately preceding consciousness. And really, it seems to me that one of the functions of being like a tree is just to act as a circuit breaker.
Mm-hmm.
Stop this avalanche of negative, non-virtuous thoughts, put a space in it, so you can just collect yourself and then go to neutral and then develop, some sort of restraint, some kind of virtuous thought. So that was really, I'm always surprised at how psychologically penetrating the Buddhist models of the mind and so on are. And it's kind of like thrown out into relief. And I just read this the other week. It's an article from the Frontiers of Science that says venting doesn't reduce anger.
Mm-hmm.
So getting angry and then just like rehearsing that anger over and over again, rehashing it, revisiting it, making it more and more intense is actually the opposite thing. And so what science says through their research is that really you want to look at what they call arousal reducing activities. One of them they give is cognitive behavioral therapy. And for me, and I might be the only one, this to me is basically Dharma teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, there's a direct analog for me. But the other one is they say for some brain types, cognitive behavioral therapy, Dharma thinking, reframing, trying to distance yourself doesn't work. And so you need other activities, calming activities that reduce anger. And these are actually more physical activities. And they give a list here, like slow flow yoga, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, diaphragmatic breathing, and here it is, taking a timeout.
Yeah.
And I interpret that as just, taking your timber time, being a tree, and just, letting yourself down regulate and then taking a reset, a reboot. That's enough of me talking. I wonder
I really
or anyone else thought. Yeah.
Appreciate your observations there. And also linking it to psychological therapies is also very, very powerful to consider. And I was thinking also of parenting, that when a child is completely out of control, they want something and you haven't given it to them, they just freak out and become totally hysterical in the middle of a shopping mall or wherever it is. It's always the worst possible place it could be. Talking back at them at that moment isn't necessarily going to work because they're confused, they're upset, they're irritated. And so we give them time out. We say, look, go and sit over there and for 5 minutes and then come and talk to me again. or go to your quiet spot or whatever it is technique you use. And that's working exactly the same way. So Shantideva's sort of humor in his verses is that we are the child of our own delusions. So we have to treat ourselves in exactly the same way. We have to go and sit on the little kids' training seat for 5 minutes before re-entering the room, because we're not fit to be in that room at that particular moment in time, because we're creating havoc and mayhem. So the childish is referring to those dominated by the afflictions, and that's ourselves. I think men's anger management's becoming a real issue now in Australia, again, with this spate of, we're having a kind of an epidemic of domestic murders of women in the home, and it's attracted a huge amount of press activity. And we've also been having large public demonstrations saying that we need to wake up and start doing something about toxic masculinity. And the role of therapies is being explored, what kind of therapies work. And people are discovering that the funding for workshops involving the kind of cognitive therapy that Stephen so eloquently described has sort of been drained away, and it needs to be restored so that men who are having trouble managing anger have a pathway to begin to work with that anger in an environment that is supportive of that journey. Whereas what happens at the moment is they end up in prison, and they come out of prison even angrier and in of more danger to others. And so these are social problems too. They're not just spiritual problems we're discussing here. And I think Shantideva's fully aware that he was talking about the possibility of a peaceful society. No, it's not possible if our minds are out of control. It just won't happen. Yeah. Would anyone like to relate a little to their own sort of struggles with some of these afflictions and how these strategies might in fact work for them?
For me, the majority of my life, I have rabbited on, and I will tell you in my reason why. I've always thought that it was okay. I did so on the side of the road as a police officer, trying to keep, someone calm when they think that they're getting arrested. And so I would talk and talk, and try and keep their mind so that they wouldn't escalate. And that worked for me. And now I use that same rabbiting on to make people feel welcome and included. And I noticed today that I am definitely oversharing.
Oversharing.
Oversharing, and that I probably should pull back a little bit more.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Giving too much and not looking after yourself, you mean? Or
I don't need to talk about every aspect of I'm realizing I don't need to talk about every aspect of my life.
I see what you mean.
I should probably
I appreciate
keep
that.
some of
Back. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so it's true, isn't it? Because the compulsive need to talk. A lot of us are compulsive talkers, and it's often really just a way of handling anxiety, isn't it? We sort of try to secure a position by chatting. So the Buddhist mindfulness approach is to relax, as Stephen was pointing out, in our bodies as well, like to just gently yield to a feeling of relaxation. And then on that basis, we have more scope to be present in a room. This is an issue I know has come up very clearly in the palliative care field, where people who are training to be palliative care nurses felt that initially when they're doing their training, this incredible pressure, they're putting it on themselves to be able to say the right thing, the right time to a dying person. And as the sort of the Buddhist palliative care movement became sort of more developed, the new advice sort of started to come out that all one needed to do was to be there. This is particularly came out of the New York Zen school, as we know, just simply to be present in that moment without talking was more than sufficient. In fact, it was abundantly beneficial because it was reassuring and held that person in the arms of care, if you like, without the need to verbalize. And so there's a fear in not talking that needs to be overcome, I think, as well here. We're just not comfortable being quiet. Yeah.
Thank you for that advice.
So I do palliative care.
Oh, right. Well, tell me.
And I have a 99-year-old now who is in palliative care. She has very fast-growing cancer. But not only that, but in general, I practice zipping the mouth so that I don't create more blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
And it can come across as me being uninterested or cold or aloof or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that silence that I have also allows other people to talk a lot or to get angry and irritated and take up a lot of space. And then just really practicing being rooted and grounded.
Mm.
And for me, it's not a quote dead piece of wood that's just like lifeless.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is the rooted, very active, very energetically connected, like boom, let's up and down. And it's really that alive, immovable, not a dead, lifeless.
Dead, immovable. That's beautiful. Thank you.
So
yeah. So you've trained yourself in that, it sounds like. You've been a kind of a journey of developing that skill or that ability.
I've been I make mistakes all the time, but I've been a Zen practitioner for over 25 years. And I live alone, and I live in a van, a small space, and I choose to not have a lot of contact with very many people. I honestly choose that as a practice. Because like sometimes something, forgive me folks, but sometimes even at the center, especially if we have a luncheon, with a weekend retreat or something, it's too loud for me. My ears, my head, I seek silence. So after a teaching, I want to just go be quiet and not participate in the it's like overpowering. I feel like I'm being hit by a stick. So I don't know. I'm like a little hermit person or something. To each our own. Thank you.
It's an incredible privilege in one's life to be able to live in that way when you think about it, isn't it? I was often, thinking of being a cave of one's own kind of thought. And we have to have a cave of our own we can resort to. And it's a space within ourselves where we are able to rest and rejuvenate. And for me, that's a really important role of our meditative practice, to create that space. So in your case, it's also embodied in your environment, your local environment, in your cabin or your so forth. But I think we can develop the equivalent in ourselves as well, through our own mental conjuring, if you like. It's a form of trust in our capacity to transform in the ways that have been so beautifully laid out by Shantideva's text. And to have that goal of bodhicitta is so extraordinary. Stephen mentioned simplicity before. It is profoundly simplifying to generate an aspiration to enlightenment for the benefit of others, because everything else falls into place behind it in a very natural and appropriate way. And because it's intent on care and love and compassion, we can 100% commit ourselves to it. There's nothing to be worried about there at all. It's totally a perfect refuge, dynamic refuge. So I really appreciate that description of the tree being alive, because it's very important. We're not becoming a dull person or a kind of a inert person, insensitive even. But we're becoming more highly aware, highly sensitive, and acutely aware of our environment and our surroundings in those moments as well. So we might conclude there. So I'll ask Lou to lead our dedication prayers, but we definitely have something to dedicate, so we'll give it away with all our hearts.
Just give me a second. Oh, there they are. Okay. The dedication prayers. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too remain. So until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through his kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. The incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chen Rezuk Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until psychic existence is ended. A prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher and assembly of children of victorious ones, Travakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the opposite refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. And holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth and the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels, The great waves of the mind generation to the children of the victorious ones, with a smile of a new reincarnation, swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
So thank you very much, Loon. Thank you, everyone, for attending and sharing. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye all.